When Finglas was just a community with a small bridge between us and Finglas West, and they filled in the Finglas River. It was a great bit of crack for us when we were in school because we used to be able to run through the pipes from Watery Lane right down to Finglas Bridge. But it turned out to be a pretty devastating thing to do. It divided, in a certain way, the community as well. And the fact then that they had 2 or 3 different schemes going up over different years made things sometimes a little bit difficult.
There's not really much space because they've built a lot of housing around us. So there's only one space now leading out to the Abigail. So it's okay, we lived here for 50 years. And it's okay for people to move in beside us, but not really for travellers to move in beside them.
By the end of the 1970s, the last of the Finglas countryside had disappeared under the new housing estates of Finglas South. From a small country village when my parents moved in, the population peaked in 1979 at over 53,000 people. It was the year of the oil crisis, and the 1980s arrived with an economic crash that saw massive unemployment and immigration. Hardest hit were working class areas like Finglas, and a huge young population with little or no prospects led to all sorts of social problems. A dual carriageway had cut through the heart of the village, separating east from west, and the newly built south was still finding its feet.
Finglas East would have considered themselves to be a step above the people in Finglas West, and I think we were on a par with our neighbours in Finglas South, and Finglas North were over there, and they were there, right? But in all of those communities, the community activists that came out of those communities were wonderful people that gave their all to develop the community spirit of Finglas in I suppose, up against all adverse publicity, problems that lots of communities have. I mean, in those days, it was joyriding, it was glue sniffing, it was drinking flagons in the fields. There were the issues then. Now, of course, it's drugs.
There was so many of these vigilante groups, they'd call some fella up, they'd read out the charges against him, or the list of evidence. I remember one up at the Church of the Annunciation there, outside the shops there on a truck, and all these guys got up and they had 4 or 5 lads and they read them out, and I knew one of the lads. I'd seen him, I knew him from the area, and I went, him. You would see people and you look at him and go, oh, I don't remember him 2 years ago. He just looked so charismatic or handsome. Now here he is, a 19-year-old, and he looks 40.
I remember on a Sunday morning, I could be guaranteed to stand upstairs in the front bedroom, and cars would be coming out there and doing handbrake turns and up around, just showing off the people coming out of mass. I mean, these were 16-year-olds. These were young fellas, totally out of control.
When I came here, I just noticed there was nothing going on at all. Like, there was no arts, there was no sports, there was very little of anything other than football.
We had good teachers, but they didn't seem to have much faith in us doing very well. I think they believed we weren't capable of much, and that had a really profound effect, I'd say, on all of us. And in fact, they didn't even bother. I didn't learn anything about college from career guidance teachers. It was through a friend's brother that I learned how to apply. I didn't qualify for a grant. So Dad went down and asked the credit union, and they got me through.
I just thought, Finglas is just grim. You know, there's nothing here. It's run down. There's lots of people are not working, you know, and lots of people are getting into crime and so on.
I was one of the many young people in Finglas who left the country to find a quality of living that home simply couldn't offer. And like many, I returned some years later. Some, however, never came back.
We loved Finglas, and both our families lived there. So, you know, I mean, it would have been the ideal situation if we could have stayed in Finglas. But unfortunately, housing in Finglas, there wasn't new houses being built at the time. Plenty of second-hand houses up for sale, but we just couldn't afford the prices. Mortgage rates at the time were 17%. You know, I mean, that sounds unbelievable in this day and age, but that's the way it was. We eventually decided to emigrate to Australia.
Ireland was in crisis, but Finglas was singled out for special treatment.
In the 80s, there was a Today Tonight programme aired on RTE, and they used Finglas as an example of how Dublin suburbs were in crisis with drug problems, with antisocial behaviour, crime, and they really painted a negative view of Finglas, and it was very one-sided.
I was hanging around an area called Hazelcroft at the time, and a few lads came up for the river and said, "There's fellas hunting outside or down there. All you have to do is go on and say a few things on film, and they won't know who you are because you'll be blackened out, like in silhouettes." And whether that's a true story or not, certainly being told by 16-year-olds at the time.
It made the whole country aware of Finglas and gave them this idea that Finglas was just this no-go area, this horrible area. And that impacted on the people of Finglas themselves.
There was this setup. 3 lads came out of Colossus to Ida on horses and then went up the hill. And I thought, yeah. If you're outside of Finglas, you're going to think this is everyday activity.
The whole country was aghast at, what was happening in Finglas and the dysfunctionality, the unemployment and the crime. And, we were kind of the poster boy for how not to have a suburb.
In Finglas, we probably would, like with any community, would have liked to say, it's been exaggerated, it's not the reality on the ground. And yeah, a lot of the time it wasn't, but it was as well. I remember nights when you go out and you can hear cars screeching around the roads because stolen cars were a big thing at the time, so it made people look and say, yeah, we do have issues and we need to deal with them.
People felt ashamed, they really felt ashamed of their area. If you were going for jobs or if you were trying to do anything outside of the area and mentioned you were from Finglas, you were often snubbed.
There was an image and then there was the reality. Now the reality we found wasn't the reality that people in general had. And then the media then, every chance they got, they would crucify Finglas.
That negativity, I think, was the inspiration for a lot of creatives.
That drove us to push back on that, and to say, no, hang on, Finglas isn't like that, it's like this.
My dad was one of the many people across the Finglas community who began to fight back in an effort to change the media narrative that had singled out our town to feed its shock headlines. Finglas had been fragmented by its housing policy and geography, but now its people came together, and together they were strong.
Your dad was very much involved with the group to stop the toxic dump here in the early 80s in Dunsink,
People were saying that they'd have to get things going to stop this smell of this dump and the danger of it. And it was all going into the Tolka River, and it got very interested in all this. And we used to meet regularly these people who were interested, school teachers and priests and anybody who was interested that way. And they had all these ideas. They used to stand outside the council offices asking all the cars to blow their horns as they were passing. I kind of proposed to these people that the river that was being polluted, instead of just being one group in Finglas, if we started at the top of the river where it started and went to the bottom of the river and got groups the whole way down, we would have a better chance of closing this pollution and the dump. So eventually we did this and got the people to come from Europe, the European Union, and they sent this person. And they forced the Corporation of Dublin, Meath County Council and Fingal County Council to all work together to clean up the river.
Whether that was attending meetings to get the dump closed or working with local youngsters, trying to get them to paint murals, to give them something positive to do. He was really involved in the community, and that couldn't help but rub off on us. So when, I think it was 1987, when Dublin announced that the following year, 88, was going to be the Millennium and a year of celebrations for the city, it struck me that it was a chance to showcase all of the positive things that were happening around Finglas that never got reported in the media. So I remember calling Pat Finucane in the bottom of the hill, and he said I could use the lounge upstairs. I phoned every organisation, every group, and I invited them down for a meeting to talk about a festival for the Millennium. And I suppose because I'd arranged the meeting, I was voted the chairperson, but I was 20, I hadn't a clue about anything like that. So thank God wiser heads prevailed, and Brian Browning stepped up to mastermind the whole thing.
We made sure that we have representatives from north, south, east and west within the group. Because the idea is that we wanted to bring the whole community together where they had never come together before. I said, right, we'll launch this, we'll have the opening day in Finglas Village, we'll get the cops on board, we want every road into the village closed off. And they're looking at me, yeah, we want everything closed, no traffic in Finglas Village for the whole day, and we want people to come into the village. Whether they go to a pub afterwards, or whether they're seeing that or seeing that, it doesn't matter. We want them in. But not only that, we want them to come from the 4 communities. We want you to parade into the village from your community, and the central point being the Finglas Village. And I think the breaking point on this for me was that we invited the Lord Mayor, Carmacita Hedeman, the First Lady Mayor, as I understand it, Dublin, to open the festival. And she agreed. And what we used to do is ask these groups, why don't you put on something that you're involved with? So if you're involved in angling, why don't you run an angling trip for people who are interested and bring young kids out and teach them how to fish? And of course, the pubs did extremely well because they had a show on every night and the village was hopping.
While Brian and the team were planning the festival, I decided to set up a newspaper in the area, the Courier, which later became the Finglas Forum. And when I look back at the early editions, they're really quite amateurish. But that became a platform for local people to unify and share information. And like, we'd no problem every month cramming that with all of the things that were going on. You'd the likes of Mary McDermott and Art Squad. My sister Moira was doing the Finglas Environmental Heritage Project. There were tons. And then there was the music and the arts. I mean, they were absolutely blossoming in Finglas at the time.
I remember reading the little articles, and I'd kind of said, geez, we must be reading the band because it's in the forum, it says it here.
I wrote off to the Finglas Forum and asked if I could write a column, and all of a sudden I had my first newspaper job, writing a story every week, and I learned about deadlines. I remember coming into the newspaper office and thinking, God, this is somewhere I'd like to work, and you all seem to be having great fun. And I met the photographer who I'd then go on to write a book with a couple of decades later.
Indeed, Finglas was producing writers who were to make their mark on the world of literature.
There was very little room for us, or we felt, in conventional publishing and conventional magazines, and so Raven Arts Press literally began with us making photocopies of poems by local poets. It wasn't even called photocopies, and I can't remember what the technique was, but you went into somewhere and you got them copied and selling them around pubs in Finglas and in town, and then deciding to go into publishing. And there was somebody who worked in Smurfit's, and so Michael Smurfit became a great sponsor of ours without him knowing it, in that we would occasionally appear at the back gate of Smurfit's printing operation with a large fistful of fivers that we passed through a hole in the wire, and books of poems would come across. And so literally we actually had no money. 3 people gave us money, 10 euros each, AIB in Drumcondra, AIB in Finglas, sorry, Downs' Bakery, and Fergal Quinn.
The written word wasn't the only way that Finglas people began to express themselves.
We set a programme for people to come forward that was involved in the arts and sports and different activities, theatre, and we got a group together, so we became a committee. So we had Myra Casti for the art squad and for the historical end of things, and then we had somebody else, Anne Grogan, who was interested in archiving, and we had Declan Cassidy, who was the forum, so everything went into the forum, so that got out to the public. And then we had John Fox involved in the sports, so John was there developing the sports, but everything, the hub was Closh to Ida for a lot of it.
The number of groups that would have come in here and just met through the school and everything else, of the actual community spirit that's in Finglas, the number of groups, whether it be just football clubs, I mean, there's loads of football clubs, arts groups that were started here, gymnastics clubs, you name them, scouts, I mean, there's loads there. If you're to look in every little school hall, and there's groups nearly every night of the week, and people outside don't see all that vibrant kind of community spirit where everybody networks together and helps. I mean, you go to some of the clubs like yourselves, I mean, Erin's Oil is just down the road, fabulous club. You've Finglas Celtic, we've talked Rovers, we've Mount Boys. There's loads of clubs there around the area that do so much just for sport as well.
Sport was an area where Finglas people could shake off the stigma that had been attached to them and show that they could not only compete with the best, but shine. The other area that offered an outlet for the hopes and dreams of a socially disenfranchised youth was music.
My very first week's wages when I started with Dublin City Council in 1980, I instead of bringing money home to my mum, I bought a guitar. So I then spent the next kind of few years, someone would say to you, oh look, John Doyle is up on Plunkett Road and he knows Stairway to Heaven. And you'd actually call up to his door, knock at his door with 3 or 4 years and his mad answer, and you'd go, is John there? And she'd be kind of a bit suspicious. John would come down the stairs, he'd only half know you, and you'd say, come here, I heard you know the chords to Stairway to Heaven. And in we'd go and we'd do it. And that's the kind of way Finglas was. We had this whole kind of group of people that went and learned music from each other, you know.
The 2 people next door to me were in bands as well. So my next door neighbours were in, Sandra McGowan was in the D11 Runners, and then Derek Cromwell on the other side of me was in the Soft Music Company. So in 3 houses there was 3 bands. In fact, you could say 4 bands, because my brother Tony played bass in another band as well.
You'd like to sack coming through, you had Aslan, you had Alien Comfort, the Brilliant Trees, you had Missing Link, you had Mockingbird, just in, you know, to name a few, you had a Marigold, Swell, Kick to the Heart, you Blue Carnage. These are another few, and I know more will come if I keep talking.
I think some of the community people here, some of the works with creches and the schoolmasters we met, they really, really could see the good in us, you know, and try to bring it out in us. And I think that came to, we got the fruits of that with the bands, you know, and with that kind of explosion of culture and energy and, you know, wanting change, you know, and loving, standing up and loving your suburb.
The Finglas community was alive with a new energy, and Dublin Corporation appointed 2 planners to lend an official hand.
We found that there was very little resources to be made available to Finglas where we were going to work. So we looked around and we said, what resources are there in Finglas? So we have the people, we have leaders, we had a newspaper, it was your newspaper, we had the teachers in the secondary school and the primary schools, and we decided we would work with them. We looked around and see what did Finglas have. So it had the most extraordinary heritage and history.
Indeed, Finglas is full of heritage sites and rich in a history that a lot of us, growing up in the area, were unaware of. Finglas is first mentioned in writings about St. Patrick, who converted the local Druids and left a holy well that in the 1700s saw Finglas becoming a spa town for the rich, until the so-called Turkish doctor behind the spa turned out to be a scammer called Joyce from Kilkenny. The well, though, remains today. There's also an old ruined church on the site of a monastery that, along with one in Tala, were so important that they were known as the 2 Eyes of Ireland. The ancient nether cross still stands in the old graveyard there. The road to Finglas was made by the Normans to transport trees from Finglas Wood for building and weapons. The wood in Westminster Cathedral's roof comes from the area. The Vikings were in Finglas too. Bones of an important Viking woman were dug up in the old graveyard recently during building works. Both King William and King James, who fought it out in the Battle of the Boyne, were in Finglas. King William's army left a stone structure known as King William's Ramparts that can still be seen. Finglas also had Ireland's first commercial airdrome at Kildonan. In the 1800s, it was the in place to live for the rich, a rural beauty spot on the doorstep of Dublin. Many of their mansions became asylums, such as Farnham House, that was levelled to make room for the Spanish convent, which in turn was flattened to make room for a housing estate.
So we looked at the history and the heritage, and the most important buildings, we'd say we'll try and preserve these. St. Helena's in the south, Rosedale House, Towson's Cottage. All those buildings were threatened at the time. So we decided we would try and preserve them. Now, the most important thing in planning terms was that back it would have been the 50s, 60s, they decided to demolish the village. So the carriageway was put straight through the centre of this most historic village in Ireland. And it's just unbelievable that it happened. The road should have gone over the west and circled and kept the village intact. We worked away, we set up schemes, shopfront improvements, and we found business people. The resources were the Chamber of Commerce, there was the Finglas Chamber of Commerce, and then the teachers in the schools, secondary and primary schools, and then we would work with them.
There was a move to brighten up the village. They had some shopfront competitions, and they had some nice ornate ironwork with hanging baskets and nice floral displays from the shop fronts and also on the paving areas.
Finglas had more than any other village, any other area. A lot of it is still there if people would only recognise it. They're not told about it. And they should be proud of Finglas, and they should know what to be proud of.
Finglas certainly has a lot to be proud of. The list of notable Finglas names is long and impressive. It includes footballers Ronnie Whelan, Frank Stapleton and Stephen Kelly, GAA stars Charlie Redmond and Jason Sherlock, Olympian Alma Rock, writers Dermot Bolger and Paula Meehan, artists Googie and Michelle Boyle, musicians Bono, Christy Dignam, Brian Brannigan, Niamh Kavanagh and Gavin Friday, bands The D11 Runners, The Brilliant Trees, Aslan and Sack, actors Brendan O'Carroll and Colin Meaney, designer Peter O'Brien and puppeteers The Lamberts. But the perception of Finglas from years of negative media persists.
When I went to college and realised there was this perception about Finglas people, one of the things that was always on my mind was the fact that there were so many high achievers from Finglas that I didn't think people were aware of. I always thought, God, I wonder do people know that all these people are from Finglas? Because for me growing up, you just had to look around to see all these people doing really well who were from the area. And I always said to myself, I'd love to write a book where I document all their stories and their connections to the area. And I was approached by Darren Kinsella, the photographer who we both know from our Finglas Forum days, because he had a plan to take pictures of people who were from Finglas who were well known to put together in a book or an exhibition. There was the obvious people that we wanted in the book, the Bono and the Brendan O'Carroll and the other high profile names. There were local characters as well that we identified with Finglas and we thought everybody would know, like Father Declan Blake or Father Deco as he was known, who was a very famous priest in Finglas West in his time there. There was Chris Ling, who's the owner of High One Takeaway, which is an institution in Finglas. There was Jerry Salvetta, who is also associated with the takeaway in Finglas. His family ran the local chipper, but he was also a singer in the church. And when we produced the book with 40 stories, subsequently I had about another 40 people approach me saying, I'm from Finglas, or so-and-so's from Finglas. When it came to the time the book was published, we got a lot of attention from newspapers and radio programmes who wanted to know more about this, and that was exactly what the book set out to achieve. It was to highlight the good things that people had done in Finglas, the achievements and the things that didn't normally make the headlines.
The Blowins, like my dad, who were part of the transformation of Finglas from a country village to one of Ireland's largest towns, are passing on. But they've shown us that it doesn't matter where you come from. When you settle in Finglas, the Finglas or clear stream gets into your veins and you become part of a community with a long, proud history and a hopeful future. The faces of Finglas might change, but the spirit remains the same.
We learn from our history, and if we don't learn from our history, well, where do we go? What do we have to go on, or what kind of values can we bring forward and learn from the past? And I think the heritage is all part of that. It's all part of the history. For me, the beauty of the heritage is the people, the culture that the people brought, and the spirit that the people of Finglas had.
And a lot of those people who first moved in are in their 80s, and a lot of them have unfortunately passed away, and new people have come in from everywhere, every other parts of Dublin City and other countries around Europe and around the world.
There were men on our road who went to England to work and who only came home for the summer holidays and perhaps at Christmas. And that was quite acceptable in that it was something that happened. And now, looking back on it, that was such a strange way for people to have to live. And if we think about it now, there are probably people from other countries coming here and doing the same thing.
They're from different places and they speak different languages and they all look different from people.
It's pretty diverse, I think, because I have a lot of friends from all sorts of different countries. So my experience with people from Finglas is that like they're always like there to help you. Like they'll always offer a hand or like explain something to you, show you directions, whatever. I've never really had like bad experiences with like just kind of like strangers. Like I've always had really good experiences. I think that through the eyes of the media, they only capture maybe like the bad things that happen here.
The spirit that was started, say, back around the time of the Millennium, that is still evident today in the village, especially with the help of the Finglas Tidy Towns Committee and group.
It just needs a whole new vibe to it, you know, shops, restaurants, updated, you know, and other sort of amenities in it that would draw people to the village, you know.
If people are involved in the decision-making process, in influencing the direction of things, well then that's fine. If it's developer-led, if, for example, if there's developers now that want to destroy the village centre and the pub that was there and everything and put up big office blocks or apartment blocks and change everything, well then, you know, the community are not involved in that. So it's to get to the stage where things are not developer-led and to try and get back to where we were trying to go, where the community were key players.
I feel the Dublin City Council too have come on board a lot, and they have encouraged us with different things over like the summer festivals, and they do lots of things. They do a summer fest up in the Farnham Park, and they invite all of the whole areas from down in Hillcrest right up to Finglas West, Finglas South, up to Finglas North. Now they're always make sure that we're all involved in these things, and they're fantastic at doing that. And I suppose we learned in Tidy Towns to involve people as well from all over the community.
The fact is that this little river, and Finglas, the Bright Stream, is buried under the road. So it's there for future generations to rediscover it and maybe to relocate that road over to the west.
When you grow older, do you want to stay living in Finglas?
Yeah, I want to run my family's legacy while staying in Finglas.
declancreative.com.